The audiobook and the paperback version of Insomnis by Lux Noctis is available on Amazon. Links are in the description below.
Curious things seem to occur in the farthest corners of the world, leagues away from the towering spires and man-made monsters born of fire and steel. In distant lands, there lie locations that seem somehow disconnected from the realm you know. Mystery still pervades, unmarred by modern life. The tale I tell you now is one pieced together from traveling whispers, for those that know it are reluctant to tell. The scene for this story lies far to the north, farther than anyone of sound body and mind would ever have cause to travel. It is a barren land, one almost entirely devoid of life, for little could survive in its icy wastes. The rising peaks and bitter ocean make it appear almost alien in nature, and so its days follow suit. Unlike elsewhere, the sun remains hanging defiantly in the sky for weeks at a time. When light finally does fade, however, it makes room for the moon to reign, bathing the snow in near perpetual night. The dark time was approaching. A man wandered alone, ascending towards a treacherous peak. This man was named John, and he climbed for the sport of it, relishing the challenge. The few others that lived in his small fishing settlement were content to sit fireside in their free time, rather than face the brutality of the elements. Spiteful winds lashed at his weathered face, sending white powder soaring. All he could do was smirk in return. Frozen air burned his lungs with every breath, and it made him feel alive. He swung his ice pick heavily, anchoring to the snowy earth and dragging himself upward. As he glanced over his shoulder, he could just barely glimpse the silhouette of his village through the snowdrift. His journey had barely begun, and he felt comfort in being close to home. This comfort was short-lived, however, for with a couple more arduous steps skyward, his exhilaration turned to fear. His eyes widened as the telltale creaking, barely audible over the howling wind, gave way to a deafening crack as the ice beneath him shattered. He fell headlong into blackness, colliding painfully with coarse, unyielding walls. John's descent was rapid. Blindly he tumbled, and every hit he took reverberated around him. Then, silence. A momentary freefall before he came to a sudden stop, to the sound of shattering bone. His pained wail echoed loudly, and for an instant he was deafened by it. He struggled through the agony to hold on to consciousness. John freed himself from his heavy pack, rolled onto his back, and lay on solid ground. The spot of light above him seemed distant as he clutched his broken wrist. He breathed heavily, trying to calm himself as his body shook, fueled by a concoction of pain and adrenaline. Gradually, his ragged respiration slowed, and tense muscles began to relax. John lifted himself from the ground, trying to remain stoic in the face of adversity. He refused to let fear overwhelm his senses and was careful to avoid applying pressure to his splintered bone. Quickly, he came to the realization that it would be impossible for him to climb to freedom with his broken arm. He called for help, knowing that his cries would go unanswered, drowned out by the screeching winds above. With a wince of discomfort, John twisted and used his working hand to retrieve a torch from his backpack. Its light sprang to life with a soft click, illuminating the glassy walls. He scoured their surface, praying for a way out. The light fell upon a hole in the ice. He shuffled over, finding that the opening was barely big enough to squeeze through, but it was possible. He had to make a choice, whether to sit and hope for rescue, or to try his luck. John wasn't the sort to sit idle and wait to die. He retrieved his pick, which had taken the fall far more gracefully than he had. Using a bungee cord, he hooked his backpack to the loop in his belt. It trailed behind him as he inched his way inside the tunnel's entrance. Even with the flashlight, there was no end in sight. John could only stop and glance periodically before returning to his agonizing crawl. He cursed his good-for-nothing wrist and groaned in response to his aching back and increasingly sore knees. Determined, he pressed on. The low temperature birthed a worrying lack of feeling in his limbs as the walls began to narrow around him. The ground became slick and John struggled to keep traction, sliding forward against his will. He attempted to halt his descent, but to no avail. The tunnel became too steep. John picked up speed. The torch slipped from his hand and he was plunged into darkness once more. Breathless, he hurtled out of control, blindly caught in a most dizzying decline. In an instant, the earth disappeared from beneath him and he was forced to endure another crippling fall. The intrepid climber hit the snow with a thud, pack still in tow. The rattling torch followed him, creating its own impression in white powder. Flakes on his skin turned to water, making his trembling hands damp. The broken wrist pulsed as he clutched it defensively, gritting his teeth against the pain. Regaining his bearings, he sat up. A shaft of light pierced the darkness. A distant sound, like that of static, caught his attention. John hauled himself to his feet and dragged his battered body and his belongings towards the vital light source. Flashlight in hand again, he could finally sling the rucksack back over his shoulder and examine his surroundings. He was in a hollow, one seemingly carved from the ice itself. Untouched snow creaked beneath his feet as he cautiously explored. The body of the cave shimmered with a watery brilliance, giving the appearance of being forever in motion. Vast pointed icicles hung ominously overhead, threatening to fall at the slightest disturbance. His boot splashed in a previously unseen stream, flowing silently at his feet. The distant hiss was steadily building in intensity with every step taken. It was then that John saw something he was not expecting to see. Something that made his stomach knot and his heart miss a single beat. The torchlight had fallen upon a woman, dressed in rags and encased within the glistening wall. Her bright green eyes glowed fiercely from within her frosty prison. John approached, struck by her magnificence. Instantaneously he became enamored with her graceful form. She was encapsulated within a tomb of perfect clarity, and to him this seemed a crime most heinous. He placed a damp palm on the ice, matching it with her own raised hand. The surface felt warm to the touch. Her mouth appeared trapped in the midst of the most beautiful melody, and he wished, more than anything, that he could hear that sweet sound. John grabbed his hefty ice pick, and with all the force he could muster, he swung it at the glimmering wall. It bounced off with a pathetic click, jarring his good arm in the process. He tried again regardless, swinging repeatedly, attempting to free the frozen beauty, but to no avail. The battered explorer sighed, and his heart grew heavy. With all his strength, he hadn't managed to make a single scratch. He dropped to his knees and stared for who knows how long, craving her freedom. The flashlight began to flicker. Its power was getting low. However reluctant he was to leave, John knew that if the light died, he would be stranded, and worse yet, he would no longer be able to gaze upon the icebound maiden. With a final lingering look at her under a flickering beam, he turned on his heel, beginning his search for an exit. He headed for the static sound, wandering through winding pathways as the light gradually died. His mind never strayed too far from thoughts of the mysterious girl, even as the torch grew worryingly dim. The sound he chased became progressively louder, turning from a hiss to a low rumble, then rising to a deafening roar. He spotted a silvery glow, that of a bright moon, and knew he had found a way out. John staggered towards the narrow mouth of the cave and crossed the threshold to find himself beneath a starry sky, caught in the spray of a thunderous waterfall. Pangs of hunger twisted his gut. It dawned on him that he must have been in that place for hours. Trudging through the snow, he shivered violently. Heavily fatigued, he was relieved to soon see the lights of his humble home in the near distance. This was not the end. John became infatuated with the hollow, and the mystifying woman trapped within. Even when the near-endless night began, he still traveled back there again and again to see her. His strange behavior did not go unnoticed by the others in the settlement, Tall tales emerged in an attempt to explain why John had turned from a personal member of their community into a recluse. Every blackened day, he would emerge from his home to a chorus of whispers and disappear for hours at a time, only reappearing to sleep before the cycle started anew. All their theories were incorrect, however, for only he knew the truth. John didn't need the others, for he had his fair maiden. His attempts to free her were fruitless, but relentlessly he continued to try. The impossibly warm ice kept him from freezing during his extended visits, and he felt it near impossible to pry himself away when the time came to rest. Her prison seemed impenetrable, but the fisherman spoke constant reassurance. He would not cease until they were together, he would say, holding his hand against hers, soaking up her soothing heat. The fair one's face remained static, but he knew that she believed him, that they were meant to be together. Over time, he became frustrated, attacking the wall with as much brutality as he could produce, disregarding his bound and broken wrist. Still, he made no impact. He roared in fury and asked the girl a question. "What must I do? What will it take to set you free?" He pressed his ear to the slick surface, and after listening closely, his pupils expanded. Smiling, he told her that he understood, promised her that he would make it so. One was not enough to free her. First, he asked a single man to follow him to the cave. Bewildered, but curious to get to the bottom of John's strange behavior, he agreed, and immediately, he too became captivated by her. This pattern continued over the next 11 days. Each man who followed John to the imprisoned beauty refused to speak of what they had witnessed, but every one convinced the next to join him in experiencing it for themselves. Those out of the loop, particularly the women, demanded to know what was going on, unsettled by the unusual happenings. None would tell. On the final day, 12 men fought to breach the frozen cell, but it was hopeless. Disheartened by this, each became aggravated, just as John had in the beginning. However, only John knew the truth of what had to be done. No one could have heard what took place within those walls, all sound buried beneath the roaring waters of the fall outside. Once it was done, John stood alone, bloody ice pick in hand. Motionless shapes littered the ground around him. 12 warm hearts lay on the snow at the feet of the fair maiden, staining it a most glorious shade of red. "My love, I have done what I had to. Now you can be free," John said with gleeful excitement. Nothing seemed to change. The beauty, bound in rags, remained unmoving, still stuck in the middle of her magnificent melody. He pressed his ear to the ice again for one final time. John's expression became a small, content smirk. He kissed her as best he could, mere inches away from razor-sharp fangs. "I understand," he whispered, never seeing the shadows that shared her frosty prison. "The final heart shall be my own. For you, my darling. No, for us," he stated with a tone of wonder. It is said that as the pick pierced John's heart, a single crack appeared in the impenetrable frost. I cannot confirm this, for when I traveled to that fishing village myself, all who reside there refused to converse with me. Now, perhaps this is all just make-believe, hearsay and superstition. After all, no one can say what happened for sure. It could all be naught but fiction. What I can tell you though is this, my friends. I found no beguiling beauty encased within the walls of that place, and there were no hearts piled upon the ground. All I found is this: 13 frozen corpses, chests opened wide, and an immeasurable pile of shattered ice.